we're going to kind of take you through what that is and also how our General Assemblies work, which I would hope. How many of you know what a General Assembly is? Okay, more people. Who's competed before? Awesome. So we like that. We have a lot of new people from this school and other schools, which is why I want to bring you into train, take you through some of the logistics of MUN, and specifically, little things you can do to really excel in this committee. So you have the crisis note?
Terrible handwriting in left hand, leave me alone.
Alright, so our crisis committees are the robber barons of the United States, the Gilded Age in the United States. We have the Pirates of the Caribbean Committee, the Brethren Council, and then we have the third one is the Apple Board of Directors. So what makes a crisis committee different from a General Assembly is that in a crisis committee, there's a whole aspect of a back room. So I'm going to explain how this works as simply as possible. There are physically two rooms, a front room, in which you guys are delegates, that's where you guys sit, that's where you guys debate, that's where you guys vote on things. And then there's a back room of college students. We have a staff of over 100 people that are going to be dealing with you guys and interacting with you guys. The way to interact with this back room is through crisis notes, which will explain how to write and what goes into one. So I'm just going to take the arbitrary position of the Minister of Defense in a committee. Within my crisis notes, I can use powers that the Minister of Defense would have. The biggest difference here is that instead of being a country like India or America or China, you are a position. You have a very specific person, and you're representing that person in that committee. So as a Minister of Defense, I could send a note that could say, leverage my powers and station my people at all the borders of XYZ country to have this impact. So you notice that I used something, a resource that I had, I listed why I wanted to do it and what I wanted it to do. That's the basic structure of a crisis note. You'd write that on a piece of paper, you'd put it somewhere, either in the middle of the table, it might be a basket, and then one of our staffers will run in, take that basket, run into the crisis back room, and the back room literally functions as the rest of the world. So if I did that, that back room could either approve or reject the notes that I just sent. They could say, okay, this has been done, the impact is this is the effect of it. When your crisis notes are extremely effective and have a very profound impact, the bigger impact is what we call a crisis update. These are going to be happening every 20, 30 minutes in your crisis committees, where people from our staffers are coming in and updating you in a way like, someone has stationed this many troops here, and this has had this impact, now this country is very mad at us. So the idea of a crisis is to, yes, create more of a crisis, but also solve the crises happening using your portfolio powers. So I realize it's a little bit confusing, so I'm going to stop there. Are there any major questions?
I'll help simplify. I think learning from examples is so much easier. A crisis room, you guys are going to be 15 kids, and you'll be sitting in a circle, and you'll have someone sitting in the front on the dais. Okay, this will be the chair. The chair is the person who runs your whole committee. There'll be 15 of you sitting in a circle under you. And you'll all be representing a person. So a committee I was in, my first ever committee actually, I only started doing MUN in college. My first ever committee was a committee in Rio de Janeiro, whenever they were preparing for the World Cup. And I was the Minister of Education, and it was a joint crisis committee, which we'll explain in a second. And one of the committees was the government, and the other committee was the drug cartel in Rio. And my position was the Minister of Education, and what it was I was Minister of Education in the front room, but in the portfolio, or like you get a description of your position, and it'll say what you know, the people you know, the powers you have, and things you've done. And in that, it told me that I was also one of the shadow leaders of one of the biggest drug cartels in Rio. And my position was to subvert my committee and ruin the chances of the government stopping the drug cartels. And it was built on the reality that multiple people in the government were bought out by drug cartels, and their whole goal was to make the government of Rio inefficient, right? So I was told from the beginning what my goal was, which is subvert the committee, and which was to still keep my cool the whole time, and no one find out that I'm part of the drug cartels. I ended up succeeding, and the drug cartels won, and I ended up getting kidnapped by the drug cartels, and I went to the other room with another 15 people, and in that room, I was my original position, which was just the head of one of the drug cartels. Cool, does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
What's up?
So, if you're doing the crisis committee, you get a portfolio?
Yeah, so you'll get a position, which we've given you guys, and you get a background guide, which is on the website. And I know for some reason you can't access the website from the school, which is get them home. You can download them. And the background guide will be like 20 pages, and it'll give you an introduction to what the committee is, what the major topics are in the committee, and what the goals are of the committee, right? For example, Apple's board of directors is going to be timed right after Steve Jobs passed away, and what's going to happen to Apple afterwards when Tim Cook just took over as CEO, right? And you'll be all the extremely influential people on the board, and you will not at all have to be following history in what happens. The goal is to put a bunch of people in a room where you have political clout and you have a goal that you're all working towards, and to see who does best at diplomacy, and to get everyone to do what they want in the room. Does that make sense?
Wait, so, I think we already got the portfolio, which is the background.
No, you haven't got the portfolio. You got the background guide. Portfolio you'll get about a week before the conference, and that portfolio will be emailed to your advisor, and it'll be a portfolio for just your position in that committee. It'll be like a page, maybe 2 pages, and it'll give you your background information, where you were brought up, where you went to school. It'll give you your overt powers, which is the powers you have in your position in the committee. It'll give you your covert powers, which is powers you have as an individual, like in mine, right? The drug cartel aspect, the fact that I was bought out, no one else can know that, but as a covert power, that was the power I had. I had a lot of money that the Minister of Education wouldn't have. And then you'll have your connections, which is people you know, whether they're in the room or outside of the room. Outside of the room is where the back room comes in, right? That's where we have 100 kids, who are about like 10 to 12 of them are going to be working with every single crisis. And those 10 to 12 kids, their goal is going to be the rest of the world for your committee. So in Apple's board of directors, you'll be 12 kids sitting in a room as the board of directors of Apple, and every decision you make affects the whole world, right? If you decide to make a new product, if you decide to stop making laptops, if you decide to do things, the world will react, right? And then what will happen is those kids in 12 in the back will write articles like press, like BBC, CNN. They'll be your mother, your wife, your brother, your sister, whoever you message in your notes, they will respond to you as those characters. So that's what they simulate. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you have any other questions for general crisis?
Cool. So in a general crisis, you have that one back room that you're writing to them, hey, do this, and they're responding, and they're also giving the entire committee crisis updates, and in addition to responding to your notes and giving you personal updates. That is an extension of that is joint crisis, which is what that Rio de Janeiro committee was. In a joint crisis committee, you have a larger back room and 3 separate, in our case, 3 separate committees that are interacting. So we have the space, the race to the Milky Way. We have the United States, China, and Russia. These 3 nations, per se, are taking up, what is it? The United States is a U.S. conglomerate. It's the entire Western Hemisphere, essentially.
It's the new Russian Empire,
And
which
then,
is almost all of Europe. And then it's the Chinese Republic, which is practically all of Asia. So it's a point, how many years, like 50 years in the future, where we reached a point where we're burning out Earth's resources. And a lot of the countries couldn't sustain themselves economically, because they didn't have enough resources to sustain majority of the economies in the world are resource heavy, and when you start running out of resources, you can't sustain your populace. And it led to them conglomerating. And we built it up to 3 major empires, and how they deal with the crisis in terms of resources, and in terms of us now having the capability to colonize outside of Earth. Cool?
right. So how that works in the crisis aspect is every update your committee passes, per se. So every time your committee decides this is the decision we should make. That doesn't just affect the back room and the rest of the world. Now you have 2 other committees that are going to get those updates also. So think of it as an extension of crisis in the fact that the crisis in your room, you have to think about the impact they're going to have on the other 2 committees. So yes, the back room is still the rest of the world, per se, but there's also 2 other committees simulating the rest of the world and responding to what you do. That being said, you can interact with delegates from other rooms, such as when he literally went to the other room. He defected from his committee he was in and went to another one. But also through notes that, like the same way you would send notes in a General Assembly or send notes in a crisis to other delegates in the room, you'll be able to send notes to people in other rooms and collaborate with them and work towards a greater goal.
Yeah, to add on to that, we have students from Thailand, Pakistan, India, and a few other countries where we have a bunch of students from all over the world, and they're all in all these committees, and you get to meet all of them, all these different committees, And in terms of how you interact with them, these kids will be in the other two rooms. If you guys are Russia, for example, the decisions you make, you'll end up having to make an alliance with either China or the US at one point in the weekend. And whenever you make that alliance, someone from your committee might want to go meet someone from the other committee. You'll walk out of your committee room, and your committee room will be just Russia, and their committee room will be just the US. You'll walk out of your room, you and a group of you, whatever you want, and a group of them will meet outside of the rooms with someone moderating, which will be a staff member, and you guys will make decisions. So like you'll sit down and be like, okay, as a representative of my country, you as represent your country, we want to do these things. We want to bomb China and decide to take over the northern area of the empire because we need those resources to expand into Mars or wherever you want to go. And you'll meet outside and you'll physically get to see those people. In a general crisis, you can't do that because it's only your one committee room. But in a joint crisis, the rest of the world is simulated not only by a back room, but also by other delegates in the room. So it gives you, as delegates, a lot more control over what happens in your committee. Does that make sense? Like any questions. The more questions, the better. Because then we can simplify what you guys want to know instead of us just going on and on and on. No? Cool. Keep going, Dan.
Alright, yeah, so the one piece of, I guess, writing that we've gone over the most is this crisis note idea, which is you're sending to the back room, getting responses, having impact. The other big piece of writing that's different from resolutions and general assemblies is a directive. I think those of you who are familiar with general assemblies, you're, I guess, familiar with the theme of encourages or asks or calls for. It's very, I guess, it's more of a question of something you should do rather than actual actionable. The biggest difference in the crisis committee is that it's immediate action. So a directive written will actually say, move this many troops here, send out this release, tell this, you're being very actionable to achieve the goal. So this crisis update that happened, say there's been a bombing in Times Square, and you want to deal with it as a committee, you would be like, send relief to this area, help these people find shelter, get very actionable, and the committee votes on this, and rather than it being a 4-day process, like in the General Assembly, where you're writing the resolution, and you come to one that you guys really like by the end of 4 days, and everyone votes on it, in this committee, which is much smaller, mind you, someone will write it, there'll be a necessary amount of sponsors that need to sign it, it'll go up to the front of the dais, and then once voting procedure is entered, once that is passed, that directive has an immediate impact in your committee. So maybe 20 minutes later, someone from the back room will come and tell you, hey, this is the impact of your directive, in a more interesting way. Be like, okay, you guys sent relief here, you saved the lives of this many people, however, the aid you sent has been intercepted by a certain militant group. So now you have to deal with that new crisis, that I guess the consequences of the solution you guys tried to form. So it's much more, in a sense, actionable and constantly moving forward. And if you're not just dealing with one problem that you start with, you're going to encounter various problems throughout the course. Does that make sense?
No, that's true. That all makes sense. The reason we're starting on crisis first is because crisis is far less common in the high school circuit, because it's very common in the college circuit. And then, from Karan told me, you guys know a lot more about GAs. GAs are also what the UN really normally does, so it's far easier to understand in terms of concepts. So we're going to go through crisis first, and then we'll go through GAs. What's up?
So because it's going much more quicker, there's gonna be more crisis events happening.
Oh yeah, like every 20 minutes, something will happen. Whether it's on something that you did as delegates, or whether it's something the back room decided they wanted to see happen. Like some crises will be natural disasters, there'll be a famine, others will be protests, others will be economic meltdowns. Like we had a crisis committee last year. Last year we were the race to the New World. It was England, France, and Spain, and whoever colonized the most land in the New World. And one of the biggest issues was every time England got attacked, all they did was raise taxes and then just buy more things, right? And it reaches a point where you raise taxes to the point where people can't pay your taxes, and it leads to rebellion. And we led to like a major rebellion, and then they fixed the rebellion and led to like an economic meltdown, because you can't fund your whole government on taxes. So they had to come up with an economic plan to stimulate their economy and figure out what to do in terms of the aftermath of a rebellion. So like things like that. It's very dependent on what happens in the committee, how the backroom responds, and then your response to that. And the better your response, the nicer the backroom will be. the less thought out your response, the more fun the backroom will have at poking you and being like, that wrong, you need to fix it. Like we've had some terrible ideas in the back and led to, like as delegates, and led to us having like to deal with so many more problems in our committee.
The biggest lesson there is we have an idea of what the committee is supposed to look like after 4 days, but the crisis is very much driven by the delegates, that's you guys. So the notes you guys send are going to have an immediate impact on the updates that the committee as a whole gets, and I guess how much power you have and how you're doing the committee and what responses are necessary. So, you want to go into, so wait, any questions on crisis or joint crisis at all? Yeah?
Are there costumes like the Pirates of the Caribbean? Are they wearing anything or?
No.
So it's normal.
Yeah, normal.
business?
If
Okay.
You want to. You
Because
want to.
no, because sometimes in other places I've been, they dress up. And so
Yeah,
I
no,
wanted to
it's
know if you guys
for
are
us
doing
it's
that.
never been mandatory. We're
Right.
never gonna make it mandatory. It's not
Right.
that you have to wear anything.
To give an example, I was in an Avatar The Last Airbender committee at Columbia this year, and I was, for those of you familiar, I was Suki, and I had a golden fan that I like would whip out every now and then. People really, really passionate speech,
Right.
but like, question was necessary, guys. Like, I was still in the suit.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's more for emotional if you're laughing than it is like necessary.
Any other questions? Backroom, notes, directives?
It's a lot.
Yeah.
How many kids or people are in the back room?
Each backroom, staff like 12 people,
Yeah.
10 people?
10 to
So
12 people.
you should be getting note response fairly fast. Most clinics get on the day of, but our note system works a little different from other schools where instead of only doing paper notes, you're gonna send the paper note to a staffer at the front of the table. That staffer will type up your note and send it to our backroom electronically. Someone will respond to it electronically, and then that staffer will write the response to your note and give it back to you. So you should be getting responses fairly quickly. I don't think we'll have a problem with that. So you'll be well staffed. That's definitely not an issue.
Last year our response time was under 5 minutes.
So you should be
for
sending a
most
lot
notes.
of notes. Be able to send a lot of notes if you want to.
Yeah, because we have a lot of kids sitting in the back. We have about 1-to-1 in terms of kids sitting in the back to respond. So like, the more you send notes, the better. It's also better for you as a delegate. In that crisis is very hierarchical in that you have a lot of power as a person, you have infinite power as a committee, and then you just have to deal with all the problems of crisis, right? And the more power you build as a person, the more influence you have over a committee, and the more willing crisis is to listen to you. So the more notes you put through, and the more work you put in individually, the more responsive crisis will be to you, which means the more influence you have in the committee. Like we have points where both Kurt and I have been in situations where like we become so strong as delegates because of the notes we've been sending to the back room that like I had the independence of Pakistan and India, and that was my committee, and I was in a room with Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Nehru, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and I was one of the Sikhs, which is like 2% of the population, and in comparison like 60 and like 40, and it led to I did enough work in crisis to lead to at the end of the weekend, it wasn't just India and Pakistan, Punjab became a Sikh nation, and that was just my nation. I became a governor of my own nation and had a lot more say in the committee when I was given such a weak position to start off with. So it's very dependent on what you make of the situation you're in and how creative you are in solving the problems. Like the biggest things we look for in a crisis in terms of awards is creativity, diplomacy, and ability to get your points across, right? So that means one is speaking. Like how I explained it to everyone last year, because I also ran all the content last year for Paramus, was 33% is your speaking ability, if you can get your point across to everyone in the room. 33% is your diplomatic ability, if you can get other people behind your ideas. And 33% of it is notes. How creative you can be to the people in the back room so that they respect your ideas and can help push forward your committee. The more you help push forward your committee or do interesting things, the more the people in the back will like you. And the more interesting ideas you bring to the front, the more willing people are going to be to listen to you. You want to move into GA?
Yeah, so that's a crisis. There's 2 rooms, you're dealing with it through notes. In a general assembly, for those of you that are familiar, instead of multiple directives and multiple crises, you have your topics. They're already up on the website, they're in the background guide, and you're looking to address them as a large committee. Now you're countries again, you're not people. Here, what the biggest thing is working towards that large resolution. There's going to be multiple blocks so actually let's just water it down more. There's all these countries, and there's an idea of who you're going to be working with, but it's not set in stone. in the first committee session, that's Thursday committee session, it's a lot of, I guess, block building, and setting the topic. So the committee sets the topic, okay, this is what we're gonna talk about first, this is the most important situation because you guys kind of in unmoderated caucuses and moderated caucuses will start to create your blocks, convey your viewpoints. And then as you move into Friday and Saturday, this is where the writing happens. So you're in committee and you're now in your blocks and in your speeches, you're proposing ideas, you're encouraging different things for the UN to do, why this will help your overall goal of the committee. And then I guess the real standout part, where in crisis, to build power, what you're doing is sending notes and having it impact the front room. In a General Assembly, you're writing those clauses and making them your clauses. So in a speech, you're getting up and saying, the United States believes this because this policy and this, like just really walking people through structured speeches. And then when an unmoderated caucus comes around, we're all familiar with like moderated caucuses, unmoderated caucuses? Yes? Okay. So when an unmoderated caucus comes around,
I thought that was a real yes.
Yeah, what's that? Can we get a raise of hands? Everyone go to different caucuses and like partly put on stuff that we're saying? Okay, so just to like break it down really quickly, yeah, moderated caucus is like set speaking time. We're kind of, it's very moderated by the chair. You speak, you speak, you speak. Unmoderated caucus is a free-for-all. It's crazy. Everyone just walking around. You're in your blocks and you're doing the actual writing of this resolution. So how you gain power in a GA is when that resolution writing is happening and you're around, let's say 15 people who are working on the same ideas. Everyone wants the same thing. You're the person leading it. You have the pen and paper, or you and someone else have the pen and paper, and you're taking people's ideas and like really including people, but you're leading the block. Being the leader is what, in a General Assembly, people are looking for most. That's how you build power in the chair's eyes, because there's no backroom, there's no separate way to really build power. So you have to constantly be on top of your block and really be the person people go to and identify with each resolution. Because there's going to be clear, I guess, leaders, like, okay, this resolution is clearly led by you, this resolution is clearly led by you. And it's like, apparent who's going to speak for it come Saturday.
To add on to that, I think it helps that I didn't do it at all in high school, so I had very little knowledge of how to do MUN when I came to college, and I got thrown into it like my first week, and I had no idea what moderated unmoderated caucus was, let alone what a GA was, or how to deal with it, right? And in that situation, I think like to explain GA best, it's you win on diplomacy and that's it. Like everything else is irrelevant. The UN is built on diplomacy to the point where they're bureaucratic, in that they didn't fairly get any decisions made because everyone wants to compromise. It's the same way in a GA, in that your whole goal is you're not going to be getting responses from a back room, right? So it's not as if you're trying to move the committee forward, it's you're trying to gain as much influence in a room of 30 people. We're gonna have about 30 people in our GAs. You're trying to gain as much influence as possible in a room of 30 people as you can. And that's built on consensus. So like, you'll start off, you'll be a European nation, it'll be very easy for you to become friends with all the European countries. And be like, we all believe, like one of my committees was the UN Drugs and Narcotics Committee. And I united everyone around the idea that marijuana is good, and that we should legalize it, and then we can make money off of it, and we can tax it, and it can lead to forward progress for all of our nations, right? But as a European nation, that makes sense because we have the ability to control it, and we have enough of an international network to stamp down the drug cartels, right? But at the same time, all of the Asian nations were completely against the idea of us having any sort of legalization of marijuana because there's Muslim countries, and there's a lot of countries that just believe that they don't have the police infrastructure to be able to stop people from using excess of a drug. And that led to me only having a block of 10 out of a room of 60 people. So I changed my tack and moved it to, how about we don't legalize marijuana, how about we just don't criminalize marijuana? In that people don't get sent to jail for having marijuana, instead they get fined a ridiculous amount of money, right? And that brought a lot of the Asian nations that weren't Muslim, because Muslims are just gonna be like, no, there's no chance. But it brought a huge amount of the Asian nations to my side, and it led to us compromising to a way in which I had a good 40% of the room on my side, while the other people only had 10 or 15, right? That was compromise and changing what I wanted to get as many people in the room as possible. That's what a G is rated on. That's where you get a resolution on. Like, you shouldn't be writing the whole 6-page resolution. You should be writing 3 clauses in it, and the other 10 people in the room should be writing 4 or 5 clauses in it. And it should be a work in progress as a team, and when you stand up, you should present as a team. You win by showing that you're the person who's helping as many people as possible get their point across in a room. While in a crisis, it's very different in that you're far more selfish and that you want your point across. And you want want other people to follow you instead of you helping facilitate.
Oh, yeah, here, I have it. I just, because I saw your word, email.
Alright. So wait, before I move on to this, any questions about General Assembly? Any questions about crisis? Okay, so this is kind of going to go back to crisis and explain to you the paperwork, because that's kind of, resolutions, GA paperwork is, fairly straightforward, and I think have you guys covered that? Kind of what a resolution
Oh, I don't
is and
think
stuff?
everyone understands entirely. It's like
We have an
Let
example.
me show you a resolution also.
Yeah, we can go into that.
Okay, so actually
Go to
let's start with the resolution first then. So this is a resolution written by one of the, the best GA delegates and the NYU team. This is very long. Okay.
This was our double delegate team. This is our double delegate team that's won 4 gavels out of the 5 committees they've been in.
Wow.
And that's at like Harvard in a 200-person room. Yeah, these 2 were amazing. And they're both graduating this year, sadly. But yeah, so it's from anyone to learn from this time.
So in a working paper is just what a resolution is called before it's submitted to the dais. So you guys are working on it. You're adding clauses. It doesn't have to necessarily be the neatest thing in the world. You're striking things left and right. People are still trying to just get their ideas on paper. Does this have a preamble? Right? A preamble? Yes. Yeah, okay. So in a resolution, there's a very strict format essentially. This is the top right here. Your working paper, it's named. You have the sponsors. Usually supposed to be in alphabetical order. People are going to try to put their names first. Those little things, I guess, are important, but that's, I guess, the format for it. You have signatories. You're going to need a certain number of votes. Those will be determined by your chair and the number of people that show up for the fund.
Sponsors are people who've written things in the working paper. This is their working paper, and they get to represent it. Signatories are people who just want to see, they just want to hear the working paper discussed. That's it, right? You need a minimum amount for sponsors, and you need a minimum amount for signatories before you can ever present this in front of the room to display, for vote, for discussion, for anything. Until then, it's just a piece of paper sitting on your desk. Does that make sense?
Right. So we're going to try to go through this fairly quickly, but I'm going to send this to Senora and Monty, and they can forward it to everybody. How this works is the first step is called the preambulatory clauses. These clauses precede the actual recommendations by the committee, and instead they kind of go through what
the body has already claimed. So this was laws of the sea, I'm pretty sure, right? Yeah, and so this whole page says absolutely nothing. It's how the UN works, in that you first need to acknowledge what the UNCLOS has already said about the laws of the sea, right? So say acknowledging, noting with regret, aware of the lack, alarmed by, noting the vague, acknowledging, understanding, further concerned by, right? So these just like, this is where the world's at right now. This is what we've decided, these are the decisions we've made. A lot of this stuff is copy-pasted from the United Nations Convention on Law and Sea. Like, straight from their website or straight from the actual, what do you call that? Their constitution.
So if you want to leg up, would it be wiser to prepare these?
Yeah, they're 99% always prepared.
the kids who write these. Essentially, the committee, you're sitting around and then someone starts writing preambulatory clauses. That kid knows he's not really doing anything, but getting the ball rolling is very important. So, like, to know, I guess, for your committee what your preemp's going to look like, because you can get that for your background guys. Okay, this is where the world's at. This is how I'm going to write it out. Don't come prepared with it per se. Like, don't just pull it out of a binder and be like, here's the preambulatory clause.
No one likes that.
No one likes that person. But you want to show up to committee, and like once paperwork gets rolling, if you're on top of the preambulatory clauses, you stick that on top.
They don't need to be this long. This
Yeah.
is, Isabel, our previous head del, is an overachiever by an extreme amount, so she writes way too much. But, like, in terms of preamps, you need like 3 or 4. You need 3 or 4 preamps to set the basis. And then this is when you get, what's the second clause called? They're not preamps, they're, what's that?
No,
You're being sarcastic. Yeah, there's clauses.
Alright, so these are your clauses. This is where you become a sponsor. This is where you want to be responsible for most of the things written. So we're just going to go through clause 1 because there's like 30 and like it's unnecessary, honestly. But your resolution is going to be about like what, like 4 pages by the end? Sure.
Yeah, if you do a good job.
It depends on what the committee looks like, but you're going to have like a 4-page resolution with everyone's work included. So this is like a basic structure for a clause. the first word, and you can find this on Google basically anywhere, there's a list of words that you have to use to preface your clauses, and it's always something like suggests, encourages, asks for, acknowledges, calls upon, something, again, very, I guess, should do, not very actionable, and then followed by suggests an amendment, and then there's subclauses and subclauses to the subclauses. So you want to kind of, I guess, structure it in a way where like it's very easy to follow. So when you're up there presenting your resolution, it should be like, so we suggest this, and that's because of this, and that's going to cause this, and this is what we want. These are just other parts of that. So you want to structure it in a way where it's very easy to present. So when you're reading it out loud, it's very, because you're reading this in a room with say 30 people, everyone wants to, they're not reading it also, unless we project it. So they should be able to follow it without having to necessarily read it.
Yeah, let me clarify with a lot of words. This whole clause is just saying we want to change the definition of what it means to be a pirate. Okay, so that's all this says in the beginning. And then they state what it actually says in the convention, the laws, and C. And it says we want to add these two things to it. It says, this is what they think pirates are now. We think anyone who steals any kind of property on the high and territorial seas is a pirate. Anyone who has any attack against a ship, aircraft, person, or property in territorial or international waters without permission is a pirate. This is what they want to change, right, for a pirate. Secondly, this is anyone who voluntarily acts on a ship that is considered a pirate ship is a pirate. And then third is anyone inciting or intentionally facilitating an act described as piracy is a pirate, okay? That's just her setting the foundation for what they want to discuss in further on. Because I know her point, because I helped her write her position paper for this, was that we weren't strict enough on piracy in international waters because we haven't defined it. So this whole resolution is built on defining what it means to be a pirate and how we should solve this problem. And it led to her adding a bunch of ideas in the committee of what they think piracy is. I think all she wrote was the third one. Any act or inciting or of intentionally facilitating an act described in subparagraph A or B was all she wrote. And this was completely other people who agreed with her and added their own stuff. Cool? This is how they're all structured. You can go, you have to have one, which is like your overarching claim, and then A, B, C, D, which is, if your overarching claim is like 4 sections to it, and then if these sections have subsections to them, you can do 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't go past 2. At that point, like, no one reads them, because also, in a GA, you have to read this out loud. So when you stand up, you have to bore everyone by reading, suggest an amendment for the UMCLS to be submitted to Article 101 to consider the definition of piracy. As any illegal acts of violence or detention, or any act of depredation, committed depredation by the crew or the passengers, okay, you already bored, right? That was 6 pages in, you're asleep. So you want to make sure that you are direct, and you are to the point, and your clauses make sense and they're memorable. Because when people debate later, they're going to debate specific clauses in your resolution, and you want to make sure the clauses they debate in those 6 pages are the ones you made. Because those are the ones that made the most sense, and the ones that were most direct and memorable